Where are you gonna hang that from?
A curtain rod. It probably will be very unwieldy, but
Hmm.
my plant's growing season is coming to an end.
Oh, my roommate had to throw an airplane because the cat
Cat,
was attacking him.
what are you doing?
Speaking of,
Sorry, one of my cats is being weird.
no, it's good.
A lot of plants are poisonous for cats.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, and welcome to News from the Real World, where we take a look at the top 10 comment generating articles from the past week. I'm Hannah. I'm a third year sound designer.
I'm Grace. I'm a first year costume designer.
I'm Evan. I'm a first year scenic designer.
I'm Elliot, and I'm a second year technical director.
How's it hanging? I'm David Pumpkins, and I'm gonna scare the hell out of you.
And with that, let's jump right in to our first article of the week, which is Combat Fatigue with Army's Aggressive Napping Strategy. So this article, when I first saw the title, was immediately taken aback, as many people that commented on this article were, especially with the phrase aggressive napping, which seems just two words I never thought I'd see in the same sentence. And going through the article, it's actually much different than I anticipated it. My gut reaction was, why are we looking at military grade strategies in order to manage our work-life balance? But the reality is a lot of what the article talks about is how do we destigmatize napping, actually, and how there's actually a stigma brought out of Victorian age perceptions that napping was lazy, and actually it had some pretty sexist undertones, and women were seen as physiologically weak for taking naps. It starts off really interesting, things I did not expect to read. And kind of the point of the article is to give strategies to combat fatigue and to maintain your alertness, that there is a sense that we don't need to kind of pretend like we are capable of going all day long without taking a break, and that there is a natural rhythm to our daily lives. And yes, getting enough sleep is important, but it's okay to take naps, and oftentimes is necessary, especially in the middle of the day, to take a break before trying to continue on with whatever you're working on.
I love naps.
I've never been able to take naps ever since kindergarten, when they were like, "This is nap time." I was like, I will sit here awake the entire time.
I never
can't
feel
do
better
it.
after naps. I feel worse. I feel terrible.
Yeah. Have you ever had a coffee nap or a caffeine nap?
I have
No.
had a caffeine.
I've done it exactly once. Might have been before Erda's, actually. But the idea is that you have a dose of caffeine, like a cup of tea or a coffee or whatever, and then go to sleep for 20 minutes. You set an alarm for 20 minutes, which is the amount of time it takes for the caffeine to work its way into your system. So you wake up more energetic than you otherwise would, and it's supposed to be more effective than caffeine or naps alone. And I did it exactly once, and I woke up with my heart pounding. I was immediately completely awake. It's crazy.
I used to do that all the time in undergrad because there was a Dunkin' Donuts in the student center where my theater office was. So I would always swing by Dunkin', grab my medium iced caramel swirl with cream, bring it downstairs, finish that thing, and then immediately fall asleep on the couch for 10, 15 minutes. And I was
can't
able to
even-
kind of master it, but it certainly isn't for everyone. And actually the article does kind of hint at how to approach a nap and to not overdo it, and how to appropriately take naps so that you don't disrupt your natural cycle. It goes into kind of a conversation about making sure that you're not taking naps so frequently and for so long that you naturally disrupt your normal sleep cycle, because that in and of itself is still the core of your alertness and how you can be productive. It does, however, hint at making sure that you are taking frequent naps, and naps for as long as you really can. I think there's been multiple studies that have gone out about different timed naps and how that your brain kind of falls into different cycles, and how waking up in the middle of a certain cycle can actually cause more harm than good. But I think, again, the kind of idea here is making sure that you are more strategic about when you're taking your naps and how you're using napping as a strategy to combat, drowsiness and maintain alertness.
One of the things that some of the student commenters pointed out in this article is that it seems weird that the Army is just discovering napping now. Like the article seems
They are not just discovering napping now.
Oh, okay.
Anyone who's been in the military will tell you you fall asleep anywhere and everywhere you can, no matter what is happening.
Well, maybe just that they're embracing it more now then.
That's why it's funny
surgeons. Surgeons use that same motto, right? You fall asleep anywhere, anytime.
If you're tired enough, it doesn't matter how little space you have, you're out. I just find it funny that an article talking about napping in the Army is worried about sleep cycles, because you don't get sleep cycles. You don't sleep.
Which is something that maybe our industry shares a little bit. And unfortunately, I think with a lot of things in our industry, not our industry, but across many industries that have really chaotic work-life balances, to take a look and see how we can be better at balancing that and setting up a structure that doesn't push people over the edge. And hopefully, taking a nap in the middle of the day should be like destigmatized, as the article says, but it shouldn't be the only way to get success in the industry. We shouldn't be having to rely on people taking aggressive naps in the middle of their day just to get by. It should be something that we do because it's natural and it's comfortable and it helps promote our own well-being, not that it's a necessary means to an end.
Yeah, right. It's no secret that everybody needs sleep. So I agree that I would like to see more industries, and I guess service sectors, if that's what you call the military, embrace full sleep cycles as a healthy part of living.
Here begins the petition to put hammocks and sleeping places in the CFA and in Purnell, so that way we have a place to go during the day. And
where's our equity cot?
Yeah, I know. I was like, it was like, you need that empty dressing room, and you got to get some equity cots, and then you're good to go.
We had talked in PTM about getting double-decker desks and setting half the room aside for napping. Yeah. And I can dream.
Mm-hmm.
Dreaming. Yeah. Speaking of dreaming, I'm dreaming of a stairway to heaven. Yes, got it. So after a many-year battle over copyrights, the Supreme Court finally agreed with the lower court, ending the suit that Led Zeppelin stole the music from Spirit's Taurus for their hit Stairway to Heaven. The article just kind of explains about the legal battle that had gone through and the reasons why it had gone up all the way before stopping at the Supreme Court. This is actually one of the things we learned about in class. I don't remember, it was last year or the year before, about these legal battles and how a lot of songs sound a lot similar. At some point, there's only so many chord progressions and musical licks that sound good to our Western ears as can be made at some point. It's very interesting to, how long ago did these songs come out, and finally, these court battles are done.
Well, and the suit didn't even begin until the 2000s. Let me find it in the article. Filed suit in 2014. It doesn't say in this article, I think, what caused him to finally sue about this.
Money, probably.
Yeah, I was going to say, unfortunately, money is the driving factor behind most of these things. Yeah. I believe we talked last week about some copyright claims when it came to tattoos, but it kind of points out and forces us to look at copyright as a little bit broken, and almost we need to take a step back and rethink how we approach music and art in general when it comes to copyright. Because the reality is, Hannah, you're exactly right. There's only so much out there that you can make. I mean, how many songs out there use the same chord progressions for like 80% of like pop music. And
4 chords.
it's the 4 chords. And no one there is trying to take anything from anybody else. And I would think many people would agree that many songs that use that progression aren't trying to plagiarize off of other musicians. It's just a natural way to approach songwriting. It's just a question of where does that boundary land? And I don't know if our system is there to, deal with the like modern music as it is, with the proliferation of digital streaming and people putting things on SoundCloud and YouTube and all of these different platforms. And where do you draw that line? And what is kind of falling under fair use versus, what is an actual copyright violation?
Well, I never would have expected a case like this to have to go all the way to the Supreme Court. I mean, not that who owns what is insignificant, but I guess I don't expect entertainment lawsuits to, and I guess in this case it didn't, right? They declined to hear about it. I don't expect entertainment lawsuits to have to go that far. I guess I expect them to get settled out of court because everyone has so much money.
I suppose it's hard to prove. How do you prove that they heard the song? How do you
Mm-hmm.
prove that they were doing it intentionally?
Yeah, it's a whole lot of legal battle. I mean, it reminds me of also, maybe a little tangential only, but of when Taylor Swift was trying to copyright phrases from some of her songs for merch purposes. People were like, you can't copyright whatever it was, the phrase "shake it off" or the phrase "this sick beat" or whatever.
LeBron James tried to trademark Taco Tuesday.
Did he?
It starts to beg a question of like, what falls under copyright? Like, where do we draw this
Mm-hmm.
distinction? And it's really hard. I don't have an answer to it.
No.
Not like anybody does.
A
But
headache.
it needs a certain level of like conversation to say this system is broken. I mean, if you talk to any number of like YouTubers over the past 4 or 5 years, you've seen this massive movement, especially from smaller based YouTubers, about so many of their videos getting copyright claimed and demonetized for the smallest of things.
That's also a problem with YouTube's platform and rules and all of that.
Yeah,
But-
their copyright claim process is also in and of itself a very messy situation that gives absolutely no power to the people that are being claimed.
Right.
So
Is this a really American problem, or do other countries have copyright issues like this too?
Well, considering China gives no
Oh, I don't know a lot about this.
China does not care about IPs from other countries. They will shamelessly steal and slap new skins on things and sell it as their own IP.
Mm.
But it does bring up an interesting question too, because now more than ever, so much art and digital media exists in the international sphere. Whereas, when Stairway to Heaven was written, it really came in it was an American-centric song. It existed and it was only distributed probably within the United States at first before it branched off to other countries, where now you upload a song to the internet, it's immediately available worldwide.
Right.
And that poses, again, a different challenge when it comes to copyright.
Speaking of rock and roll, this next article posted on The Guardian is titled "You're Left to Rot If You Speak Up, the Abuse Faced by Female Roadies." And this is by Tara Joshi, and this was published on October 6th of 2020. So the article just breaks down the culture of like the touring culture of lots of bands. And they do touch on a lot of different genres, but I think they do mostly highlight the culture around maybe like less popular bands, like not like it's more like smaller rock bands and things like that. And they specifically highlighted this sound engineer named Shay Stock, who in 2018 published a blog post about her experiences touring with the Killers and just sort of like the culture of like sexual harassment and misconduct on tour. Like there were jokes where they would like tell certain people like, we'll like give you some money if you can get some girls in our dressing rooms, or like it was sort of like a game to them. It's like, if you can get girls in the shower for us, or some, like basically just really gross, like misogynistic behavior. And they actually just wrapped up an internal investigation about it. And the conclusion was like, we investigated it. It's just like folklore, like quote unquote roadie folklore. Like, it's a joke. They're just joking around. They're just telling stories. It's not actually happening. Which, like if you've seen any media, movie, TV show ever about like touring musicians, we know that it's probably true. So there's a quote that I thought highlighted kind of the experience of being. So they highlight especially being either a woman or like being non-binary or just like marginalized, working kind of behind the scenes on these tours. So to be a part of a touring crew, you give up so much as it is just to be taken advantage of, abused, underpaid, overworked, physically strained, mentally drained, and left to rot at the side of the road if you speak up. Because the culture is, if you do like tell your employer that so-and-so from the band or a promoter or whatever, like harassed me, or, they usually get fired. And if you're on tour, it's like, yeah, you get left wherever you are. Right. And, a lot of the jokes that they talk, I mean, it sounds like it's just like a toxic culture all around. It's not just like talent and crew, or like, promoter, like, venue staff and crew or anything. It's just like between everyone. Like male crew members will be just as misogynistic towards any female crew members. They'll call them like derogatory names if like they're like, you can't lift that, like you're not strong enough to lift that thing. So yeah, I think it's just a very toxic culture. And then you add, the on top of that, like the I presume like the drugs and the alcohol and the sex and the rock and roll, and it just kind of fans the flame. So with this pandemic, obviously there haven't been like large tours of bands or musicians, and these women in particular that they interviewed said that they've been using this time to like really reflect on what it is moving forward that they kind of want to address or reassess about their position in this industry. So obviously, like accountability and creating safer spaces is a big, just like an important first step to make sure that these people can be held accountable. And they did mention hiring like third party HR professionals to report to, because like, I'm sure as we all know, it's like, you don't always want to go to the person who hired you to complain about something out of fear of retaliation or being fired. So I think right now they're just kind of talking about ways to create safer spaces, whether that's like separate rooms backstage for maybe whether it's the women, or just like creating some sort of boundary between all of these areas, just to create a more equitable space, I think. So yeah, very interesting. And it doesn't surprise me at all. And I don't know a whole lot about the culture, like band culture, or especially what it's like to be on tour with a band. But I assume it's much more complicated because it's not like you're doing a play, right? Where everything's scripted, like, what's supposed to happen, right? And so, yeah, it's
No, sorry.
no, go ahead.
It does feel so relevant to the theater culture in some ways, though, that when they talk about, first of all, nothing's more suspicious than an internal review which finds no fault. But when they did this internal review, they said, well, that it's just the culture of rock and roll, right? We're making reference to this like louder, sexier period of rock and roll history. And I feel like a lot of times when we end up in these situations with theaters, we go, well, that's just the culture at that theater, or that's just the culture of theater, And I think as long as we're making that kind of excuse, we really can't move forward very quickly or easily.
Yeah. Again, I think I said it earlier, but now is a time when we are unveiling a lot of things about our industry that for so long people ignored. And that, I mean, I remember one of my first overhire calls for an IATSE local, and this isn't anything against IATSE, but it was a older crowd that was incredibly misogynistic. I was loading in an outdoor event at my university as an undergrad, and I remember it was late in the spring, and I remember like one of the crew members like just like nudged me and was just like, yeah, check out that piece over there. And it was like a group of girls walking by, and I was just like blown away. And that's just the culture that so many people have grown up with and have been put in positions of power that feel untouchable. And Grace, you mentioned earlier about having an level of uncomfort with approaching people that hire you. And I think it also brings up a great point about like HR and how HR is not there to protect the person, it's there to protect the company, and how really we almost don't realize how little there currently is to protect us in this industry, and particularly protect people from marginalized groups. And that is a big problem that very clearly needs to be solved. And again, the hope is that with everything being stopped, it gives everyone a chance to stop and look and to think about what we need to be doing better.
I think another downfall of the rock and roll culture too is sort of like how sexualized these performers are. And we talk about how like actors are sort of put on a pedestal, but the difference is it's like you've got these bands who are directly interacting with their fans and in a physical presence. And I think the culture of like groupies, right, is this idea that like these people see them not have been it's been proven to them that they are desired and wanted and like sexual like icons and which I think is just like only making the situation worse, right? Because I don't know, and again, I'm not super familiar with the culture, and we were talking about the movie Almost Famous, but like you have these women who just wait by the stage door, and then because they're attractive, the security guard, like the band's like, yeah, let them in. And and like because these people are kind of idolized, to them it's like you just have to like check outside the stage door and they can have any girl they want out there, right? Any person who's just like dying to meet them or just even be near them. So yeah, I guess that's also because I'm trying to think, I'm like comparing it to like theater, and I'm like, well, there's the stage door, but like it's like you are not allowed. I feel like there's like, and also perhaps maybe theater fans don't sexualize the actors as much as they do in music. So
It's like the school. They're making that comment in the School of Rock movie when Jack Black makes Miranda Cosgrove a groupie, and she comes back the next day and she's extraordinarily furious because she does her research and she yells, I can't believe you did that. Like, they're sluts. They sleep with the band. And like, that's exactly the stigma and the stereotype that needs to be deconstructed. And that movie's, I don't even know how many years old, but it
15, 16.
Over a decade easily.
it's a great movie.
least. Oh my God. I remember growing up with that movie. But again, it kind of talks about that is the stereotype. That
Yeah.
is the culture.
And if you watch, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm changing the topic, so you go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if you watch the movie Almost Famous, Kate Hudson's in it, and she plays like they're essentially groupies, but she like explicitly is like, no, we don't sleep with the band, we inspire their music or something like that, which I thought was like interesting.
Is that a euphemism?
So yeah, so do with that what you will.
I to bring it back to theater for a second. Do you know if theaters outside Chicago use the "not in our house" rules?
Which rules?
I think they at least some of the larger theaters that I've worked at try to. So
there was this theater scandal in Chicago like 5 years ago, maybe less. But this theater called Profiles, the non-act theater that that got shut down by this long like expose article that came out, and there was this huge backlash about it, and there was this rallying cry, the not in our house, with the double meaning of like our theater house and also like the house we live in as theater artists. And from that movement came this set of guidelines for non-equity theaters to use in their contracts for every member of a production team, so actors and creatives and so on. And one of the big things that the Not in Our House Code of Conduct gives you, and a lot of non-equity contracts will be like, look up the Not in Our House thing and agree to it here, right? Like you have to, in your contract, you have to agree to it. One of the big things is that you have to have a clear line of who you go to report abuse, right? You have to have a person you can go to, and you can have to have 3 or 4 people above them who you go to if that person is your problem. If the first person on that list is your problem, and recourse and so on. And I think it's a really, for non-equity actors who are unprotected, to have a sort of a guiding rule like that, I think is really useful.
Good chain of command.
Yeah. If there's nothing to say about that, then I can transition us right into our next article, which is also about theater, but it's called "Using Zoom to Create Theater" by Suzanne Willett from Wit Journal. This piece is about an experimental piece of Zoom theater about the soundscape of New York. As you can see, they did a lot of found a lot of ways to use the medium of Zoom, including using one of the 2 boxes as a projection surface for like silent film style titles. I think this is a really interesting article because it explores, instead of being limited by Zoom, what are the things that we can make exciting about Zoom theater? I'll admit that I feel like I've been having a lot of conversations about how we can make Zoom theater exciting, and I'm a little frustrated by them. But I certainly am interested in the things they're doing. So they mixed pre-recorded and live. The experience it's only half an hour long. It's in 6-minute segments. And it's a sort of a broad range of types of theater that they're using to tell the story, which is about the soundscape of New York, including puppetry and movement pieces, as well as more traditional forms of monologue and that kind of thing. They also, in talking about Zoom theater and using Zoom theater, hired a stage manager to manage the Zoom window. So it was the stage manager's, was the live stream, was their screen. And then they were able to put participants on and off, so you didn't have to see participants turning on their camera or turning off their camera, that kind of thing. And they had to figure out how to manage the limitations of not being able to control, what order the windows would pop up in and that kind of thing. One of the student commenters brought up an interesting point, though, which I'll summarize. Even though it's good that we can give stage managers work, it does seem like a broadcast TV person might be better suited to that role instead of making a stage manager learn all this new technology. I think theater's better with stage managers at every level. And there's a lot of ways that I think stage managers could be valuable for digital theater, but I'm curious to see if there are companies that start conceiving of these pieces more as virtual and less as theater.
I think my biggest problem with the idea of Zoom theater is just the notion, like Zoom is not designed for theater. And I think we're so quick as an industry to try to jump onto it, to try to say, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep creating. We're going to keep pushing. There were many articles last year that centered around that idea that like, keep pushing, keep creating. And there were actually a handful that took a step back and said, we need to stop this notion that we have to be trying to create the same art that we were once creating, because we can't. And there isn't going to be a necessary, like a feeling of failure and this almost feeling of disappointment, because what we are creating, we're trying to capture what we used to have in a medium that will never capture that. And I think there is not that medium right now for theater to be really as impactful as it ever was, because the current systems are not set up to uplift performers on a digital sphere. Zoom kind of begs the question, is like, you could record a production and edit it much better, but then is it becoming live theater? But Zoom is inherently limiting, even with a stage manager, hiding and showing certain videos and trying to control things like a broadcast television person. I feel like there are many other broadcast systems out there that are almost better suited. You look at any number of morning shows that are currently utilizing this, and they seem to actually be working very, very well. So I think I'm not anti-digital medium theater or streaming theater. I have a problem trying to use Zoom. I feel like we're shoving a square peg into a round hole and trying to be okay with that and ignoring the possibilities that are out there. This almost gets into one of the last articles from today about the contract and dispute between SAG-AFTRA and Actors Equity, but I'll hold off on that discussion till then.
I think going back to like how stage managers are being hired to sort of facilitate these pieces of Zoom theater. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're all saying about like, it's not working, and there are definitely better ways to be doing this, because I feel like that's like every day of my life in class, right? Like, let me tell you, color theory really sucks over Zoom. Actually, it's not real. But like the reason why you have people who like help with like live broadcasts is because they know how to do that in terms when it comes to what, like camera angles and stuff. And it's like, you know what? If stage managers can add this extra skill onto their resume, let them do it. Because you know what? The number of people who will need those people for Zoom theater is going to be much higher than the number of people who are good at like live broadcast television, right? And they probably cost a lot more than any of these stage managers, are going to cost for this small piece of Zoom theater that you're doing. So yeah, it's like, we totally have all the resources out there to create something really incredible. I think right now we're just very focused on like Zoom. And I think maybe why we all just like don't like it so much is because we know it's Zoom. Zoom is Zoom. We're on Zoom every day. We're on Zoom right now. The Zoom fatigue is real and we don't want to be on Zoom. So yeah, like I'm hoping, it's only been like 7 months. So I'm hoping that with time, people will really fully embrace like the resources they have.
I feel like I keep hearing other students be like, "There's this amazing other platform," and I always forget the name of it.
StreamYard?
Huh?
StreamYard?
Yeah, StreamYard. That's exactly the one. Every time someone's like, "StreamYard is so cool and it lets you organize the windows and do cool things with the backgrounds," and I keep hearing about it and hearing about it and hearing about it. I've never seen anyone use it, and I don't know what that disconnect is.
I think something.
I don't think
Sorry,
people
Hannah.
just know about it.
Cost.
That's really what it is.
I mean, I'm honestly, I'm looking forward to Playground at the end of the semester, because I think that if there's a time that people who are going to be looking to innovate and find ways to do this or interesting ways are going to be doing it then, maybe.
And I think that really gets to where I was almost talking about earlier, is that the innovation is not happening, but I almost feel like we're limiting ourselves by sticking with the platform that isn't allowing us to expand. There's not incompatibly, but there's an alum of CMU, Ben Peoples, who has a company, Ben Peoples Industry, that's putting out a cloud-based lighting system that is a perfect example of a way to do these distance theater events. But I have not seen that implemented in our system at all. Granted, we haven't been really doing much in terms of performances. I'd love to see it implemented in Playground, but I think there's innovation happening, and I hope to see more of it as we go along, but maybe outside of this platform of Zoom.
There definitely is innovation happening, taking classes with and from the VMD faculty. Like there's a lot of things out there that you can really do some neat things with Zoom. I am just a little cynical because I think the only reason this is happening is because of, the only reason we're doing Zoom theater is because of COVID. And as soon as everything opens up again, I don't think there's anyone who's coming back to this ever again.
No.
I really don't think there is no market for this. This is
Temporary.
temporary. It's just people who are, I need to create, I need to do something. And they're going and trying and doing things rather than anything else.
No.
It's me with my cynic hat on.
Yeah, no, I agree though. I think that when live theater exists again, if a theater company that I knew and loved in another city was like, we're doing something online, I'd be like, I won't be there. I will be at a physical theater seeing something in whatever city I live in,
One place that I do think it actually will stick around, though, is this exact situation, podcasting, which I have seen a huge uptick in and has expanded the world of what's possible because of how far you can now bring people in, and you can have so many wonderful remote guests that were otherwise impossible to have. I mean, even I know at CMU how challenging it is to just get people in the same room together. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if even this podcast remained on Zoom, even when people are allowed to be back in person and in closer quarters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think the things that will have been valuable that have come out of this era will be recognizing that a lot of the experiences that we have been restricting to people who are physically near don't need to be that way, right? Like, I think that it's exciting that that classes and a lot of jobs people are realizing can be done remotely. I think that's a good thing, and I hope that we keep that energy in the future.
I feel sorry for the K through 12 students who will no longer have snow days.
Yeah.
And instead they will go, everyone was on Zoom today, don't come to class or don't come to school.
Remember the golden era of snow days?
Waking up at like 6 a.m. just watching the news and looking at the little banner to see.
Yeah.
Those were the simpler times.
I realized that this is a quick digression, then we'll get back. I realized that there was something that we did that is maybe a regional thing to like make a snow day happen. We had a tradition in my like middle school and elementary school. And it was like you have to put a spoon under your pillow the night before. Is that a thing? Okay.
Oh yeah.
Are your pajamas inside out?
Yes. My roommates had never heard of it. So I'm so glad.
Are we all from the Midwest?
I'm not.
I'm from the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic.
East Coast, yeah.
West Coast, Best Coast.
Yeah. Elliot, do you want to cover the SAG-AFTRA article now? Because it seems like a natural segue.
I certainly can.
Great.
So we'll jump right into this dispute, which I find extraordinarily interesting. So this is a contested issue that has been happening for a little while now. There's actually been several articles on the Green Page about this. But in short, the SAG-AFTRA union is locked in a dispute with the Actors Equity Union over the taping of live theaters. This is an update done by David Robb, published on October 7th. The dispute really comes down to SAG having claim to any recorded performance, more or less. That is their jurisdiction. And with the rise of recorded theater, where does the Actors Equity Union come into play, and where does the jurisdiction kind of land, especially in this time? And there was kind of this almost temporary notion that, given the circumstances, there should be a chance for live theater to be recorded and published within the Actors Equity Association without having SAG involved. However, that is highly contested. SAG-AFTRA has been very clear and forward about their notion. Specifically, they said, we cover all broadcast media in any form. That means movies, television, new media, commercial, radio, music, sound recordings, digital contact, whether recorded or delivered live, which is an important note. Not all live events and performances they've always historically been covered by SAG, and morning shows, which are very clearly live, fall under SAG. So the notion of doing something live isn't inherently out of the question. It's been a pretty well-established precedent. But again, because of the pandemic, they go on to say, because of the pandemic and recognizing challenges, they are trying to kind of work with SAG. And there's been statements released by both of the presidents and spokespeople from both SAG and Equity. And it is it's a contested issue. Something that Equity is kind of pointing out is the idea of lesser benefits and lesser wages that are given out. That Equity is kind of better suited for the performers. And when they are kind of crossing the line to go over to SAG, they're getting less benefits and they're getting less in terms of payment. And in particular, one of the real losers here is the stage managers, because they are being wholeheartedly left out of the conversation. Even there's a kind of going insofar as to say that they are being hired as independent contractors, completely external from the union, which means they don't get any of the benefits of being in the union. So the broader scopes question that a lot of people were hinting at, especially in the comment section, was where is this line? Like, why does this line exist? Unions are there to preserve and protect the members that were within them. And while, yes, the Screen Actors Guild and Actors Equity Association have very different like demands and very different kind of environments that they operate in, at the end of the day, we're representing performing artists and actors that are in whatever industry. I don't think any of us would be like hesitant to say that even in our own programs, people that graduate from the acting and musical theater programs, we see all over the place people that are in television and on Netflix series, but also on Broadway. So it's very clear that this is not a very, black and white separate industry. And you can look at that because IATSE branches over all of these industries. And they have different locals that are there to kind of protect different subsets of the industry itself. But it is kind of a day of reckoning of where does this division lie? And should we be kind of merging? SAG and AFTRA actually merged not very long ago, in the past decade. So it's already been something that's happened once. Is this a time when Actors Equity and the Screen Actors Guild, they need to come together? And it's just a really interesting, hotly contested issue. And I personally don't entirely know if there's a right answer here.
I think recorded theater is an inevitable for the future. After with Disney Plus and Hamilton, like just seeing the huge success of that. So I think, it's going to become a really big conversation coming up in the next decade about that. And, to me, I'm like, minimalism.
I think something else to point out, which I didn't mention, is that SAG-AFTRA has also already been covering recorded Broadway. With Hamilton, as you mentioned, with Disney Plus, like that has actually already been covered by SAG.
But how do we include, merge the two worlds so that everyone is getting, what they should be getting out of it?
Right. Exactly.
Well, one of the things that I think the student commenters bring up is that Actors Equity, it seems like the order that these things happen in is really weird. Like it seems like Actors Equity asked SAG to drop a contract and then denied it immediately. It's one of the things that the commenters bring up is that Actors Equity is maybe looking at bankruptcy because they're not making any money this year, or their members aren't making any money at least, right?
Mm-hmm.
So them realizing that what this contract could mean for them is signing over the money for any theater happening in the next 6 to 12 months is probably really scary.
Right.
But this is the exact thing, the kind of theater that we'll be producing primarily for the next 6 to 12 months is not, especially in equity spaces, is not going to be classic live performance as we know it.
Precisely. I think it really brings up a good question about, is it time for these unions to merge? Is that a good idea? Is it a bad idea?
There's a lot of reasons that why they should be separate. I mean, I think that there's a lot of reasons why the way that we treat movie actors, the way that we treat stage actors is different. Right? I think they're different industries. I think if they do merge, they have to have different rules for different types of performance, certainly.
Precisely. And again, then that brings up the conversation about stage management and stage managers who are members of Actors Equity, but really don't fall in line with Screen Actors Guild and that world. And again, like they have been hired as independent contractors, not as members of the union, to be working on these projects. And the reality is that Actors Equity is the stage management union. And would they also be included in this conversation? And if not, then what happens? Then where does stage management lie?
What might be a natural fit for that? Sorry to interrupt you.
No, please. What is it?
the Directors and Choreographers Union, which is a separate union, might be a good place for stage managers to get picked up by.
Exactly.
I mean, I think they deserve to be fully in the fold, of course.
For sure.
That might be a more natural fit if we have a broad actors union.
Yeah, I think it's easier to do that. IATSE, as I mentioned before, incorporates a lot of things, but I think primarily that's an easier transition to make, because the reality is in production there's so much overlap, and but there are also a lot of divisions that already inherently exist within IATSE. Not everyone in an IATSE is prepared to go into any subdivision of a production team. Not everybody that's a member of IATSE can go from props into lighting into sound, even though they have a general baseline knowledge. But and it's the same for the film industry as well. And I think
there's also probably a difference in pay scale. Like for SAG-AFTRA versus Actors Equity, the pay scale is so vastly different between the two.
Right.
Because one is based on seats in the house and the other one is based on, revenue and who this actor is and all these kinds of things. But for IATSE, it's generally a hourly wage no matter what, and that's more dependent on what city you're working in rather than anything else.
Exactly. There's a great I'm currently in a class taught by Sean West, who is teaching a phenomenal course on IATSE management and how do you manage within IATSE and what you do and what might come up. And it's opened my eyes to a lot of the union process, which I really had no idea, not a member of any union. And I think, again, at the end of the day, the unions are there to protect the people. And are we doing what is best for the people in either of these unions? And at the end of the day, we actors and performers are birds of a feather. And I think that's what we need to keep in the back of our minds when thinking about this is there's dispute, but are we protecting the people that we're supposedly representing?
My next article is a bit of a departure from theme. It's called NFL Game Broadcasts in 2020, Explaining the Fake Crowd Noise, Other TV Oddities Amid COVID-19. It's a long headline from sportingnews.com, written by Tad Highslop. That's a terrible name.
Very unfortunate.
Yeah. So this article is talking about what the NFL is doing while they have in-person sports. And one of the big things that they're doing is playing fake stadium noise, fake crowd noise. And there's two levels of fake crowd noise. There's the fake crowd noise you hear on the TV, and then there's different fake crowd noise you hear in the stadium, which is for the players, so that the players don't hear the noises the stadium makes that you can't usually hear because of the crowd. And there's all these rules about decibel levels and so on. But it sounds like different stadiums are able to make different choices about whether they allow a socially distanced audience or not. So some will, some won't. And those stadiums still have to play the crowd noise as long as the crowd is, minimal. There's a quote I want to pull out here. 49ers coach Kyle Shanahan said the steady stream of artificial cheering is, quote, a form of human torture. His team's quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, said it was not bad. So
hot takes.
So the idea is that every week they're going to go back and reevaluate how having a crowd noise in the stadium and on the broadcast is working, and then they'll adjust as needed. I'll be curious to see, which is basically the tone of all the student comments, is everyone's sort of curious to see how this is going to work and how this is going to shift over the course of the season.
How long is this going to last?
Right. Yeah. The other big thing this article brings up is that sideline reporters usually are able to just walk onto the field and grab the people they want to talk to, and they won't have field access anymore. So they're going to have to, shout questions down from the seats.
Get little bullhorns.
Right. Exactly. Right. Exactly. And then they're also doing the coin toss fully masked, and the national anthem will be performed remotely or pre-recorded.
The NBA bubble, when they wanted to talk to players, they would literally boom mic them like movies and just have the mic sitting right there in front of them to talk, and they would be,
Watch out, SAG-AFTRA is coming after them.
Yeah.
I for one love. I'm very much into football. I'm sure all of our Pittsburgh listeners are going to love the fact that I'm from Baltimore. And
I'm from Cleveland, so we'll talk later.
Yeah, we can't. So I've been following football. I've been watching. It's interesting because you're exactly right. Different games are taking different approaches to how to handle crowd noises. I know Baltimore has had no crowds yet, although Maryland just released a statement that are allowing 10% capacity, which is its own conversation to have separately. But it's been very interesting seeing the different games and the different approaches and how it's actually affected the games. There's already been compilation videos of, quote, hot mic moments from NFL games where you are catching things that you otherwise would never have heard because the audio levels are lower. There's been conversations talk about why they have to pump crowd noise, and it's because people are able to now hear play calls from the sidelines or from huddles even.
And this article's cagey about why they have to do it. That's really interesting.
That in and of itself is, I think, kind of almost a necessary side effect that has to be dealt with, because now you're dealing with kind of a whole new level of strategy in approaching play calling and handling of communications. And honestly, as a viewer, I have found it almost somewhat more enjoyable because I'm able to hear so much more of what's happening. You can hear so much more of what quarterbacks are saying behind the line of scrimmage when they're trying to adjust play calls, which is fascinating to hear and see how the sidelines are being handled, and trash talking between opponents is actually like really fun to hear. It gives it this kind of like backyard feeling to it. And it's really cool. There was an Orioles game that was back in it was a while ago. I think it was back in 2014 or 2015 that had no audience or had no attendees in the stands. But being baseball, it was much less, yelling and shouting. But it was such an interesting experience because it just felt like it was like backyard fun. So I've personally been really intrigued. It's been interesting to listen to it. I'll be curious to see how they start to integrate people back into the stands with everything going on, whether they still continue to pump music in or whether they have to be like conscious of crowd noise levels and stuff like that. But
I think it's like reality TV. It's like, it's like someone was like, I can't be here. And then they run off and it's like they follow them with the camera and they're behind a closed door. They're like, I can't do this anymore. And like you can hear them like ripping off their mic and stuff. But I guess kind of like relating it to theater, but also just like accessibility in general, because, the article does note decibel level, is that like, I think theater is actually pretty good at that, right? Managing sound levels so that things are clear and not too overwhelming. But like if you think about places even as simple as restaurants, concerts, even inside cars, the decibel levels can sometimes reach really unhealthy levels. Like my boyfriend's parents, they're an interior designer and an architect. And every time we're in a restaurant, they have this app and they'll check the decibel level in a restaurant because for some reason, people who own restaurants feel like it's a good idea to put metal paneling on their walls and have like no fabric, no soft goods anywhere. And they're like, this is unhealthy. Like this is, and like, if you have like tinnitus or something, it's like not good for you. And yesterday I was test driving hybrid cars, and let me tell you, the difference will blow your mind. You'll get into a normal car and be like, how did I ever sit in a normal car like this? Because the decibel level will be between 75 and 80. And that's high for like, it's like within a safe range, but like, that doesn't mean we have to put ourselves. Yeah. So I think in terms of accessibility, like maybe this will become a better thing for people who struggle with maybe like, I don't know, like maybe it'll prevent hearing damage or things like that. Cause I don't know, like I like concerts, but I don't like feeling like, I guess it's a reason why some people like concerts, but I don't always like the feeling that like I can feel every vibration moving through every part of my body and you can't hear, so yeah, I don't know, accessibility.
And well, in restaurants,
I've brought headphones and earplugs to any club or bar that I've been to recently.
That's what I do now.
Mm-hmm.
I can't handle it.
Right. Yeah, you got it. So Elliot, you've watched some of these games. Yes. They talk about the audio for the broadcast being like reactive to what's happening. How good is it?
It's not been that great. It's been wishy-washy. Like, honestly, it's better when they just try not to do anything. Like, there have been games when I watch where they like try to like after a big play, all of a sudden like whoop, you hear all this like crowd noise, and I'm like, okay, you can stop. Like, I don't need
We go there now.
They push the fader for the actually like cheering rather than just the general walla.
right. It's like a laugh track. It's one of those weird things where you almost just like, do I need this? Like, I don't need this to enjoy the game.
I bet it feels like
The
leaving.
NBA bubble didn't do that. They had crowd noise, but they didn't play with
Adjust.
it like that.
Right. And I think most people have caught on to that because I haven't seen it happen over the past few weeks. I know early on I saw a game, I was like, this is wild. And it was just so aggressively noticeable and so aggressively unnatural. That was the thing that killed me. I was like, this doesn't, like, it feels so artificial. It's like cringy.
Yeah, there's 2 radio shows that I used to listen to. I haven't in a little while, but they both had a live audience before the pandemic, and then had to figure out what to do after the pandemic. And one of them did what the NFL is doing, where they have somebody with a board managing crowd noise. So someone tells a joke, and then there's this terrible laugh or whatever, right? And the other show, which is basically a British version of the same show, did what I think a lot of theaters have started trying to do, which is they were like, we have a Zoom audience that is actually watching the show, and we have a chunk of them unmuted, and they're just reacting naturally to the show, right? And it's like, simple solutions, right? It's sometimes what works best.
Speaking of live concerts and not knowing when things are going to happen or end, Coachella has semi-officially been pushed back to to October 2021. This article is just talking about how Coachella was first pushed back to around this time, thinking, oh, things will have settled down and all those kinds of things. And as we've gotten closer, it keeps getting pushed back and back. The article was a little confusing though, because it seems like this is an official declaration, but they made a huge point to kind of complain that it wasn't coming directly from Coachella's CEO, that person wasn't the one who was, telling the public when Coachella was going to happen, or that they're pushing it back again, and all these kinds of noises. But it's not surprising that a huge live outdoor event such as Coachella is canceled, even though there have been some other pretty big, high profile events that actually happened. And continuing on with NFL games, I know in Cleveland, week 3 was 6,000 in attendance, and then the next week they had 12,000 in attendance. Some other stadiums have had 15, 16,000 in attendance, and then the motorcycle rally in Sturgis had a couple 100,000 people in attendance for that weekend.
I think there were cases that came out of that weekend.
No, I would be surprised if there wasn't.
Yeah.
So it's,
Makes
America
sense.
is still in a holding pattern.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think you're doing the thing that a lot of theater people were doing, 3 months ago, where they were going, well, maybe there'll be a vaccine, and maybe it'll all be over sooner than we hoped. And I think they don't want to cancel it because they don't want to give up, but also I think the rest of us gave up. And as one of the student commenters pointed out, they have access to these incredible people who could do digital stuff. Like who have the money to do digital stuff and make it look and sound nice. So they could put on some sort of digital, cheaper Coachella that would make a lot of money for them.
That's very true. And well, the demographic of Sturgis is the demographic of Sturgis, so there's not surprising that they actually had it in person.
I guess speaking of cancellations, I'm sorry to segue us. Elliot, would you like to talk about other things that have been canceled?
The next article is talking about colleges canceling diversity programs in response to the executive order issued by the current president of the United States. And the reality is there's not almost much to say about how awful this is. I mean, well, there's a lot to say about how awful it is, but
There's actually a perfect comment. One of the student commenters wrote, "I feel like I have too much to say and too extreme a reaction to express myself fluently."
Yeah.
Like, that's the mood.
It is the mood. It's like I can't learn, like you can't argue. It's like so if flustering. In short, President 45 has issued an executive order that in effect will cut funding within government programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings and in effect courses. And then that kind of shifts into the sphere of higher education when higher ed and universities and public colleges get funding from the government to do these programs. And there have been some colleges who have already canceled. The specific one, University of Iowa, has basically said that after consulting, they have to say they can't sacrifice their funding. In contrast, you have University of Michigan, who basically said, we're not going to stop this. This is too important. And setting aside individual universities' responses to this, which is something that one commenter brought up about how it's unbelievable that somebody would say that this public university has no money to be able to sustain these programs, which they more likely do. But it is censorship, and it is one of those things that we need to have these conversations. You should never be afraid of having conversations. Having conversations just leads to informed decision making. No one is forcing anybody to be making any choices by pushing people into these programs. No one's going to be brainwashed. People are just going to be exposed and challenged in their ways of thinking. And that is what going to colleges and universities should be doing. Setting aside like the content, the core content. The reality is that you should never be afraid of learning more. It just helps inform your decisions. It's not going to make you decide one way or another. And it's just incredibly narrow-minded, and you can try to argue all you want about the motivations behind this, but it is an incredibly nationalistic perception to try to claim that the United States does not have a history of racism and sexism and bigotry, because it does, and it still does. And our current government is not really that shy from expressing those views and opinions. And
a lot of this was spurred by the 1619 project, which came out of the New York Times. They did a long series as a podcast based on that reporting, which is terrific, and I highly recommend it. And then they developed a curriculum that schools could incorporate to talk about the broad history of racism in this country, starting in 1619 when African Americans first arrived as slaves on the shores of this country, of what then was not yet this country, right? And there was this huge backlash from especially Senator Tom Cotton of the Republicans that it was destroying America to suggest that it was racist and all those things. But I told you I listened to the podcast and it's factual, right? Like it's very little spin, if any. I don't understand how you can. I mean, I do, but I am upset about it. I don't understand how you can look at something that's factual and say we need to keep this from people.
Yeah. And speaking of
very
diversity,
divisive, and that's the irony, is that he's banning it because it's divisive, when in fact it's the very act of banning it that is divisive.
and bringing this back in, speaking of diversity and talking about how this needs to be implemented within our industry in particular. Evan, if you want to.
Oh, yeah. I didn't realize you were segueing. I was like, oh, this would be
You've been
good.
segued.
I was like, this is a good way to get
You have been segued.
What point Elliot's making.
Well, Grace segued me earlier, so I figured I'd only pass
Right.
along.
Pass the baton.
From Variety, as casts become more diverse, Hollywood's bank of makeup artists needs to become more inclusive as well, by Jenna W. Lee. This is primarily reporting done from an interview with a makeup artist named Kieran Body, who is an Asian American makeup artist who's worked with, I know her name. I lost it.
Aquafina,
amongst other Asian actresses. And she talks about getting these reach outs from white makeup artists who are like established makeup artists who are like, how do I deal with different skin tones and how do I deal with different eye shapes? And she's like, there's a quote actually, which I pulled out. She said, that's not a real question. It's skin, a base level concept in makeup. Their eyes, meaning you work with the shape, whether it's monolith or a deep set eye. And if you're not comfortable, you should strive to become an expert in your field because no actor should feel like their makeup artist can't handle them because of their identity. I think it's crazy I think it's very telling rather that there could be really established makeup artists working in Hollywood who have never had to deal with Asian people before. I think that's the thing that sort of tells you everything you need to know about this article and what problems we're facing. I'm glad that we're reaching a point where those same makeup artists are having to deal with people who don't look like them now. But obviously there's a lot more work to do. And when makeup artists from ethnic minorities get these jobs, they're paid less well. And there's not pay equity and there's not a reason for those people to want to aspire to those jobs.
And they get siloed, right?
What's
They only get hired.
Yeah,
to
it's
work
like
on
it's like,
specific
oh, like you're
actors.
the black designer who knows like how to deal with black hair, or and not to say that that's like not a bad thing, right? But like if that's the only work you're getting and you're not being seen as like just a designer, right, then that can also be harmful. And with makeup, I think any industry that deals with the image of people in any way, like it is important to have the representation, because when you don't, you're just establishing this like this Western beauty standard. And like speaking from experience, it's like I don't know how to do makeup because like I have monolids, and like when I was like 14 and I tried it and I was like, well, this doesn't look like how it's looking on this white lady, so I'm gonna quit here, stop while I'm ahead. So yeah, it's important. And again, it's just like you just have to like learn how to do it, right? Like
right.
it's not like pushing the square peg through the round hole or whatever. It's like, no, you just have to learn how to use the tools you have. It's like drawing, right? It's like art. So
Well, and I know very little about makeup, but I imagine those same white makeup artists know what to do differently with like a bow mouth or I don't know what are the different face shapes, but there's different face shapes. And we know there's different face shapes, right? And that's the thing we already deal with. I don't know why this is like the thing that they don't know how to deal with. Some of the commenters, student commenters, also bring up the fact that this is one of the reasons that we need to be really clear and strong about being open about pay. And I had to look this up once. I got a bad contract from a theater company that said I couldn't talk about pay. And I Googled it. I was like, isn't that illegal? I think you can't tell me that. And it is completely legal to tell in a contract, but you can't talk about pay for independent contractors and farm laborers. So we are one of the groups that can be legally told that we cannot discuss pay, and we have to fight it every time it comes up.
well,
Gotta love it.
I guess to kind of I have a small little story about when I took a makeup class in undergrad, and I think I told this in like another class, but we had a whole section that was like you had to change your race. And it was, looking back on it, I mean, this was like 7 years ago or something, right? And it was like, but it was mortifying because to see, and my entire class was white, to see people like they would like tape over their eyes and use latex. And I mean, they also did a very bad job, so they all just looked bad. It was just awful. But anyways,
Wait, that kind of thing goes all the way up, though. I mean, I just rewatched Cloud Atlas. You know the movie Cloud Atlas? There are so many things I like about that movie, and then they just made this completely baffling choice to have white actors play Asian characters.
I mean, but that's just like the history of theater, right?
Yeah.
Like the yellow face, and I mean, hey, opera's doing it like every day.
Right.
But anyways, I was gonna bring it back to theater to segue into our next article, which is titled "At This Virginia Theater, the Show and the Masks Must Go On," article by John Yang, Allison Thoet, Maya Lene Burr, and published on October 8th. So it highlights the American Shakespeare Center, which is in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. And they are currently putting on performances. Well, I guess they end today, of Othello and Twelfth Night. And so the artistic director, Ethan McSweeney, is kind of interviewed about this decision to have these shows go on. And the gist is just like, we as a company like couldn't afford to close and then reopen like a lot of other companies are doing. So basically what they've done is created a bubble, right, of their actors and the performers and whatever. They have to get, do symptom check-ins daily. As of now, they haven't had any cases of COVID yet, which I guess is good, but they had to start off the process with like a quarantine, rehearsals over Zoom, in-person rehearsals, and then like with masks, and then gradually they took away the masks, and then now they're performing. I guess the crew still has to wear masks at all times if you're backstage. And they started off doing outdoor performances to allow the audience to sort of enjoy it how they would like to enjoy it, whether they're masked or not. But now they're all indoor. And the seating capacity is at like 50%. The audience has to wear masks. Like, if they're inside their space, they have to follow these rules. Apparently the actors have been granted permission to stop the performance if they see someone in the audience not like complying with these rules. So far, they haven't had to do that, but it just made me think of like, how actors sometimes like stop the show if someone's on their cell phone or something. I don't know, like whatever. But the actors say that the biggest challenge so far has been having to respond or like react with the audience and how the audience is responding, because it's hard to tell. Like, you can't tell if they're smiling or chuckling. I mean, you can hear if they're laughing, but so far that's been like the most unique challenge with this. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're doing it. We can't stop them.
Right. One of the things that I think they point out really rightly is that they were one of the theater companies that could not have survived not doing theater. Like they were one of those mid-sized companies that they were like, we either do theater or we shut down forever. And I'm really glad to see, as much as I would never go see this, right? Like I still am very much anti being, as much as I would love to be in a theater, I'm very much anti being in a theater right now. But this is one of the first theaters to release a safety plan that like explicitly mentions what the actors are doing. Mm-hmm. I feel like so many of the theaters, there was one near me when I was home over the summer that was doing Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and like, this multi-step plan of like, here's what the lobby looks like, and here's what we did to the HVAC systems, and you have to wear a mask and so on and so on. But I was like, if you don't tell me that you're testing the actors frequently, then I can't be in a room where they're belting. Like, it's just not a reality. So to have them be like, it sounds like what they're talking around and not quite saying out loud is that they can't test the actors frequently, but they're keeping them in a really restricted pod with each other. And I think that's a way forward, certainly, if you must do theater.
It's a good attempt. The thing that scares me about any kind of like, you hear about these COVID bubbles, is that it puts all of the accountability on the people. Right. And I think people are the most unreliable factor of theater, of just really anything they do. So I mean, like, they're doing it. It's great. It's working for them. The article also interviews some audience members who say that they had like very emotional responses to seeing those performances, like crying because they're like, I forgot what it felt like to watch theater. And I'm like, that's great too, mm-hmm. Keep supporting the arts. Something that I wanted to also just incorporate, they had mentioned, so their production of Othello is set in Venice during the time of the plague. So they do try to incorporate the use of masks in the production, which I think is kind of clever. I don't know, like, especially with Shakespeare, I think there's so much opportunity, with all the modern Shakespeares that people are trying to do all the time. I don't see why we can't incorporate some masks, Well,
and not just Shakespeare. I mean, people were making this maybe a month or two back. People were making all these big Oedipus references because in Oedipus, there's a plague and it doesn't go away until the king like takes responsibility for his actions. So people were like saying that and like just side-eyeing it, Actually, I think
that's wink, wink, say no more.
Something first. I think there's a lot of stories that are relevant. As much as although I think that if I was going to a theater right now, I wouldn't want to be like transported back to the outside world of the virus. But there's sort of two ideas there, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I would want to go to escape, not to continue to immerse myself in the world.
Yeah, some actors wearing masks, if you're not expecting, it will be weird because it's not all of them and it's not all the time. It's just like some crowd scenes outside. It's like scenes set outdoors. And they were also doing some of these performances outdoors as well for audience members who were less comfortable being in an enclosed space, which I think is a really smart thing
For sure.
to do. And streaming, you know, just every option available, which is good. But I think if I was watching a show and some actors wearing masks and some weren't, I'd be like, what's happening here? Are those actors sick?
Oh, is that our last article?
That is indeed.
Last article. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us here at News from the Real World. Oh my gosh.